kind of running this. I'd have a lot on the agenda, but I don't, because I know these guys will cover the agenda stuff. Only thing I want to say to folks is I'm happy to be back, and it's great to see you folks, and a shout out to all my T-Mobile colleagues and friends. You can notice a lot of them because we wear T-Mobile gear. That's how we roll. And there's and Rosemary got her camera fixed, so it's good to see Rosemary. It's been a while. So I'm going to hand it over to Edward first. I know Jim has something for tonight, but Edward, I didn't know if you had any quick announcements for folks this morning.
I'm looking forward to the meetup. And we also, I think we had more than 20 for the certified Scrum Master certification, which is pretty phenomenal, and we're happy to have that. And the reason why we're happy about that is that we're looking forward to being able to do that possibly monthly with the now that Sasha, I need to confirm with him, but if he's a certified trainer, then he's been willing to be able to give that, and at that reduced price that we've been continue to be guaranteed. So really appreciate that people stepped up and took the time to take the class this last weekend, as that just really helped be able to bring this forward for all the other job hackers as well. So I want to say thank you to all. I know there was a concern that we were at like 9 and then 11 and then jumped up, and that it was really good.
I think Christopher has his CSM background there. I see.
There we go.
So he's repping the CSM certification, I'm assuming, at something.
Christopher, you can unmute yourself. How was the class?
Informative, very informative. It was 2 days, so it was like taking a deep breath and blowing out real slowly. But we made it through, and I certified this morning.
Excellent.
That's great. So, Mr. Edward, anything else?
I think that's all we need to cover for right now. Keep an eye out for the newsletter. That's going to have a lot of the details that we're talking that and those events channel in the newsletter. And Jim's showing you the events channel right now, so that's perfect timing.
Yeah, so one of the things in the events channel is the meetup link tonight. So that's tonight starting at 5:30 Pacific time. Join us for a session with Joel Bancroft Connors, who's going to talk to us about the Agile Coaching Growth Wheel. And even if you're not going to be an Agile coach, regardless of your role in Agile, it's good stuff to learn about. So join us tonight. Just follow that to the meetup page. We have a meetup the last Tuesday of each month, except for December. So just put that on your calendar and away we go. Also, you'll find a link in the events channel for the happy hour. There's another one this Friday, so keep an eye out for that one. That's also in the events channel. There it is.
The only other announcement I would make is that I believe that this is going to hold, which is that if for those folks that you may have friends or family that have been saying that they want to take part in this cohort. Of course, we're in the middle of this cohort. We can't be able to have them jump on now, but we do have plans for our summer cohort starting July 17th. So I'm going to actually confirm that with Jim all the way through to make sure the Friday discussion group and everything can happen. But that's our tentative date for right now is July 17th. So I want to be sure to give you all the heads up there.
All right. Back to you, Larry.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Edward. I appreciate that. I'm going to go through some of the stuff you probably is just a repeat of some of the stuff that Jim covered, but I just want to make sure I make certain emphasis on certain things. I'm going to go back and then, because we're going to leave the world of Scrum for quite a bit, maybe for the rest of the class. So I want to make sure I get some things that I want to emphasize for you all. Should be sharing my screen now. Let me fix my display over here on so I can see your lovely faces. All right, so way back on day one, this is day 5 for those of you playing the home version. We talked about the Scrum framework simplified. I talked about the fact that we can put it's so easy. You can put it on one slide that it's really if you go into Google and you type in Scrum Guide, you get a link to Scrum Alliance, which is the official Scrum Guide. You can read the official Scrum Guide. It's about 14 pages. Not so hard to understand, often difficult to implement because it challenges us. I often say that Scrum is really just a challenge. It's just a framework. So what does Scrum do? When you start to try to do Scrum, what's the very first thing you're going to find out when you try to do Scrum in your organization? You're going to find out all the reasons you can't do Scrum. You're going to find all the problems in your organization that won't allow for it. One of the things I do as a coach, wherever I go, and this has been the same for, I don't know, a dozen years or more, I ask a very simple question. Can I create one good Scrum team? Not can I scale it to the entire organization, not can I make the entire organization agile, but can I create one good Scrum team? Because the answer to that is going to tell me a lot of the issues with the organization that don't allow for good Scrum teams. I can talk a little bit about what I mean when I say a good Scrum team, but before I get too far off the rails, which I have a tendency to do, let's talk about the Scrum framework simplified. There are 3 roles. That's pretty simple. There's the Scrum Master, the product owner, and developers. And I believe this is still, I know they're making changes to Scrum Guide. I think this is the nomenclature that they use. There's a whole bunch of other people in your organization that probably won't be part of a Scrum team. Maybe they will. I mean, one of the interesting things about agility is it can be used in a different place of the organization. So I can imagine a world where the finance team actually operates as a Scrum team, or at least multiple Scrum teams, or where HR operates in a more agile fashion. They operate as Scrum teams. They have backlogs, other things like that. Makes sense to me. And that's some of the more interesting work, and to me, in agility, is bringing agility to places other than software development, because it kind of started with software development. So it's interesting to see it other places. People are going to have ideas. Those ideas are going to be for products, are going to be for enhancements, they're going to be for all kinds of different things. Give those ideas to somebody who owns the product, which we're going to call the product owner. The product owner is going to put those ideas into a list. Basically, we used a honeydew list on day 2. They're going to put them on a list, and they're going to then refine those items. And the refinement of the backlog is understanding what is the value and effort of the work that we're doing. You might consider other things, but those are the 2 things that are most important to me, usually. Somebody said, well, value is a nebulous term. If you're a nonprofit, you don't worry about making money. Maybe you would use impact versus effort. Either way, that's why I think value is actually a good term, because it is something that is open to interpretation. Value to whom? Value to whoever is your customer is. Impact to your customer. If you want to use the word impact, that's fine. Once we have these things in a sequence, well, once we've determined the right things to do, and funny enough, this is the step that a lot of people forget, right? How many of you work at places where you tend to do the wrong things perfectly? That's called a type 2 error, doing the wrong things perfectly. Let's first determine what the right things to do are, because Peter Drucker, I think, said very aptly, and I think this, I used to run my own business, and this is kind of how I run my business: do the right things right. That's all you need to do to be successful, or at least put the odds in your favor. There's no guarantee of success in the complex world, but let's put the odds in my favor by doing the right things. And then once I choose the right things to do, let me do them right. Simple enough. So I choose to do the right things. Once I have that, I want to do a continual refinement of the work that sits at the top, the stuff that's coming up next. I don't have to worry about the whole entire thing like I would in waterfall. We could do it a little bit at a time, just in time, like just in time inventory, or streaming video. We don't have to do everything at once before we download the video. We don't have to, we could stream it, right? Hopefully you all get that analogy. That's what we're going to talk about today, by the way. Because we've talked about, Jim and I, somewhere along the line, have talked about all the other things in Scrum. What we haven't gotten to, how do we refine the work itself? And that's what we'll get to eventually, after this short introduction. Then we're going to take a subset of that big backlog and we're going to move it into a smaller subset, or batch is the word we might use, called the sprint backlog. What is a sprint backlog? It's the work that a sprint would consume. What is a sprint? It's a unit of time, really. Most people use 2 weeks these days. For some reason, it's kind of the Goldilocks number. If you're more than 4 weeks, you're not Scrum, because Scrum, by definition, and the Scrum guide, unless they've changed it since I went to bed this last night, is 4 weeks or less, right? So it's 1, 2, 3, or 4 weeks, and then we start the sprint. Basically, the sprint starts, and then during the sprint, you're going to meet every day, because feedback's important. I want you to notice all these feedback loops. We talked about that before. Feedback's important. You're going to have this thing that they call the daily Scrum. Sometimes they call it a daily stand-up. Reason that they call it a daily stand-up is it's meant to be 15 minutes or less. It's not meant to be this big status meeting. In fact, I have a word for most status meetings. I think it is a true I think the daily Scrum is a true status meeting, because it's about the status of the work. I think that most status meetings are actually about the status of the people in the meeting. Think about it. You report to me, what are you doing? I'm looking over your shoulder. The daily Scrum is not meant to be that type of status. The daily Scrum is a true status meeting. It's the status of the work. We agreed to do these things, or at least attempt to do these things during the length of the sprint. How are we doing? Right? Sometimes we ask 3 questions, but you don't have to ask the 3 questions. I think Jim probably went over that. I like different questions. I like talking about the work. What did we do to move this work forward yesterday? What are we going to do to move this work forward today? What's in the way of this work moving forward? I'd rather talk about the work than the workers. It doesn't seem right to me to ask the typical 3 questions of, what did you do yesterday? What are you going to do today? And what's in your way? I don't care. I don't mean that in a bad way. I care about individuals. I care about people. But we should care about the work, because that's the value we derive, not the worker. So we do that. And then we get to the end of the sprint and we have a sprint review. Hey, look, everybody else, we've been working kind of, I don't want to say in a silo, we've been working together, but you all been doing whatever you all do. Why don't you come on back and we're going to show you what we've done. We're going to show you what was done, right? Not PowerPoints and other things, but if we're building software or something, here's some real software. Here's a real product increment. Here's something that we've completed that's ready to ship. And maybe we've already shipped it. Maybe we've already put it into production. And then you have the sprint retrospective. How can we get better doing what we do? If the ultimate goal of what we're doing is deliver the most value in the shortest amount of time, how do we do better at that? How did we do during the last sprint? What can we do to improve it? What can we do to improve our relations as a team? I think that there's a very human component. I think Scrum is, and Agile talks a lot about the people. You'll hear me talk about the people, specifically when we get to the very final class, actually, when I talk about this book called Peopleware. And then you have this strange person called a Scrum Master. Usually, well, they're not all strange. I'm strange, so when I'm a Scrum Master, you have a strange person doing it. But what does this person do? This person helps make sure that these things happen, right? They help facilitate. They don't dictate what happens. The whole team, the Scrum team is composed of these 3 roles. The whole team owns it. That's much, much different, by the way. And it's not something that most companies are good at. I'd love to somebody give me an example of a company that does it really well, and I'd love to go talk to them. Because when we talk about things like annual reviews and things that I rail against, it's all about the individual. What did you do? Well, it's a team sport these days. And we're not good at teams. There's a big difference between a collection of individuals working and a team, right? I use sports analogies all the time because I grew up with sports and they taught me a lot about being on a team. I'll use American football a lot. We call it football here. It's the one where you don't really use your feet. We call the other one soccer, the one where you use your feet. Doesn't make much sense. So that's the Scrum framework, right? Rather simple, I think. At least in theory, everything's simple, isn't it? I want to talk about, I mentioned a couple times this thing that I'm going to refer to as a good Scrum team, for lack of a better word. So I put together a slide because, gosh, you guys know it's not real unless you create a PowerPoint slide for it. I did that. These are what I would consider the 5 elements of a good Scrum team. This has not changed. Some time ago, I wrote a blog post about it. If you're more interested in some of the details in the blog post, you can do that. And I tried to put these in the order I think that they were appropriate. The team needs to be small. We talked about that again when we talk about day one, and the fact that large teams actually don't do more work, and in some cases in complex work, they do a lot less work. The productivity, and I'm going to use the word productivity because everybody's got a different view of it. My view of productivity is very, very simple. The value delivered per person is less in the complex world when you use large teams. It's just that simple. And sometimes significantly less. So one of the big problems, again, in my dozen or so years of doing this type of work is that a lot, especially large companies, have a propensity to create large teams. Large teams get less done. Brooks Law, adding people to a late project only make it later. Why? Because complexity is about feedback and communication. So a lot of times when I go into an organization and they have a Scrum team that has 14 people, the very first thing I'm going to say to it is, let's break it into 2. You'll get more work done. Now we have to figure out how to coordinate those 2 teams in some cases, but if we split them well, maybe we don't even. Maybe we can have 2 teams working off the same backlog, and they can work somewhat independently. Because the next thing that I want, and this order used to be the order that I wanted them in. I'm gonna speak to that because I think I might change the order if I had to rewrite that blog post. Co-located. Co-located means that we can communicate effectively at the same time, is what I mean by co-located. You might want to say synchronous. And Zoom is okay. When you all turn on your cameras, I can see your faces and I can see whether or not you're engaged. I can see whether or not you're paying attention. I can see whether or not you're humoring me by laughing at stupid jokes. There's a lot of communication in faces. We as humans evolved to be able to see other people's faces and read into their message. And you all have experienced this before, I'm sure. One of the themes that I keep coming back to again and again in my practice as a coach is that communication is really difficult. And as one of my coach's friends says, the big problem with communication is we assume it happened. I don't know how much we'll delve into that, but think about that. So the ability to see someone's face and talk to them in real time in the complex world where feedback is so critical and the amount of feedback that we need is so critical, it's really important. I'll give you an easy example. And I don't like to talk too much about my current company, but I will talk a little bit when it's appropriate. I have a coaches group that I work with. We are very aligned in how we think. You can imagine that sometimes we say we share a brain with some of these coaches because we're very aligned. We meet every day for a half hour still. We do a daily stand-up, daily Scrum. Why? Because alignment and communication is so difficult. It's so easy to hear something and then go off on tangents and start doing something. And then we tend to do things in a silo, and then you come back 2, 3 weeks later, 4 weeks later, and you look at what happened, and it's not close to what the desired outcome was. Communication is that critical. And this is something that folks overlook. That's why co-located. And by that, I mean being able to talk to somebody and see their face. So Zoom is okay. Is it 100% great, Zoom? No. Because even today, when I need to talk about something that's very complex, I generally have to go on a plane and meet face to face, and it still happens. And I think you all realize that. Third thing is dedicated. The team needs to be dedicated to a single backlog. we don't want them context shifting. We don't want them on multiple teams. Imagine if you're, and this happens all the time, by the way, and this is just an awful thing for people. And it's one of the reasons that a lot of developers hate Scrum. You got a developer on 5 different Scrum teams. Now, if they were implementing Scrum correctly, there's an overhead, right? You've got the daily Scrum, which is 15 minutes a day. Imagine you're on 5 teams. What is that, 75 minutes a day? Assuming, plus you got to get in there and you got to futz around and everything. You spend all your day in meetings. Stay dedicated to a single backlog so that you don't have that, because what I recommend to a lot of teams these days is if you take all I don't know if Jim did this or not, but I think he does. You take all the Scrum ceremonies, you add it up and you say, how much do I need to invest in Scrum? It's like 10 hours every 80 hours. Right? But if I'm on 5 teams, now what is it, 50 hours? I get 30 hours to be productive in a 2-week period of time because I'm on 5 different teams. That's crazy. So what do? I can tell you what they do. They opt out. They stop going. They say, I can't do my work and go to all these meetings. So they don't go to the meetings. What happens when they don't go to the meetings? Communication doesn't happen. And when communication doesn't happen, what happens with the final product and the value that you deliver? I think you all know. Stable. If it's all about communication, the communication is tough, and it is. Trust me on that. You know it. If you don't think about it, we think about it. We say something and we say, people nod their heads, and then they go off and do something. And you look at it when it's done, you say, I didn't say that. Here's the thing about communication. The longer you're with people, the more you're going to trust people, the more you're going to have that psychological safety and all those things that go into making a good team. You're going to get more work done. I know a lot of you are probably in long-term relationships. Raise your hand. And when you communicate with somebody that you've been in a long-term relationship with, it's much easier, isn't it? Not that there's not, from time to time, miscommunication, other things, because communication is hard, even with somebody you've been with your entire life. So the more stable they are, the better they are. I think it was Sutherland, who's one of the co-founders of Scrum, wrote a white paper one time, and he talks about hyper-performing teams. And that, I always called that a myth, by the way. I think if you're doing Agile just so you can get more, output from a team, I think you're still missing some of the reason behind it. And I'm a little sad that he wrote that paper. But I did read the paper, because I wanted to know what went into it. Here's the thing that I saw, because I was taught, I got to give a shout out to Kenyon College. I was taught to be critical of all studies and try to read them and understand them. And the thing that I understood is that the team that he called hyper-performing, whatever that means, was together for a very long time. And I think that had a lot to do with it. The last one is cross-functional. You have to imagine there's a lot of things that go into building good software. And I'm going to talk about it today, because you got to build in quality, you have to build in security, you have to build in things. You can't inspect them in. So with that, how am I going to do that with such a small team? Well, one is I got to have people who can chew gum and walk at the same time. They need to be capable of doing more things. So hyper-specialization is a big problem in software development. And I'll talk about that more when we talk about flow of work. But the key is that I need people who have the skills necessary to build that product on a single team, if at all possible. Now, it may be 80-20 or something like that. It may be that I have to ship off some work here and there, but I want to make them cross-functional as possible. And we'll talk about the reason why. Not only does it deliver more value, but it also delivers higher quality when we talk about quality as a component of value. And this is a big deal. That it's a byproduct of being small. If I'm saying your Scrum team should be less than double digits, 9 or fewer people, and you have 20 different skills that are necessary, I need those 9 people to have as many of those 20 different skills as possible, which means I have to have people who are cross-functional, and I need to bring people of different backgrounds. We don't like to do that, by the way, as human beings. We very much like to work with people that we're comfortable with in a specialty. And so cross functionality is always a big problem. But as when I go through theory of constraints and other things, I'm going to show you why not having cross-functional teams just delays the value that could be delivered by having cross-functional teams. Now, when I put this list together, probably about 10 years ago, and if anybody tracks it down on the internet, you can tell me if it's 10 years or more, but it's probably about 10 years ago. This was the order of importance. If I were going to attack, looking at a Scrum team, and I was going to attack a problem, I would look first at size and then co-location, et cetera, and try to solve for those wherever possible. The thing that I've saw probably in the last maybe 5 years, in my experience, is the cross-functional is really important. And it's the one that's overlooked, and it's a big problem for a lot of folks because we live in this land of hyper-specialization. And there's a lot of reasons for hyper-specialization. One of them is if I'm the only person who can do something, I'm a little more secure in my job, which is always good to be secure in your jobs. I was laid off when the pandemic happened. It's a disruption. It sucks. We all know that. But hyper-specialization is a problem even for the people who have hyper-specialization, unless that's the only thing you want to do with your career all your life. Because yes, you will be in a position where no one can get rid of you, but you're also in a position where you can't move. Right? So those are the 5 things. I know Jim went through them, but I just wanted to go through them again by way of emphasis. The other thing I want to emphasize before I get into the building of quality into the process and what I refer to as story refinement or item, backlog item refinement, is the concept of cadence and investment. And I know Jim goes over that, but that is huge. If you find yourself in the complex world, one of the first questions you want to say structurally is, how much time do I invest? I liken it to going to the gym. Maybe I don't know if Jim uses the metaphor, but going to, work out. We all want to be fit and healthy, but we're more likely to work out if we build a schedule, we build a cadence, we set a time, and we hold that time. That's cadence. Investment is, I go to the gym every day, but I only go for 5 minutes. Great. Not going to do much. That's the investment part. When do I go to the gym? How much time do I spend in the gym for me to be effective? And for me, it's generally, if you look at Scrum and you look at the ceremonies and other things, it's generally about 10 hours, about an hour a day on the average. And that's another thing I can look at when I'm looking at a Scrum team as a coach. I'm saying, how much are you investing? Do you expect to be fit and healthy and you're going to the gym 2 days a week for 15 minutes? Yeah, good luck with that. Right? Hopefully this makes sense. A little recap of some of the materials that Jim had with the emphasis that I like to put on certain things. And do a little segue into the next one. Hopefully I'll get through it. I'm hoping I get through this today. We'll see. I already took up a half hour, so I got to get moving. Building quality in, the beauty of behavior-driven development. Sometimes I'm not very good at titles. I don't know if that's the best title for this thing. I find behavior-driven development beautiful. I'm going to explain it today. This is again that part where we're taking the work that we've decided to do, that we've sequenced, the stuff at the top of the backlog. Now we're going to have a good conversation about it. We don't have to go into detail about everything. We're going to go into detail about the stuff we have at the top, the stuff we're going to do next. I start with my good friend Deming. Some of you are familiar with W. Edwards Deming. There's a whole story. I'll probably refer to him again when we talk about systems. I'll tell you the Deming story, so I'll hold on that for now. I like to think of him as a grandfather of Agile myself. Quality. He is big on quality. Quality comes not from inspection, but improvement of the production process. What does that mean? That means we cannot rely on mass inspection to improve quality because you can't inspect quality into a product. The quality of the product is there or not there by the time it's inspected. Now, Deming worked in manufacturing. We're working in complex product development. I'm going to speak specifically about software. For those of you who aren't in software, you're going to have to do some mental gymnastics, but hopefully not too much, to say how do I apply these concepts to what I do? Because you can, and you're smart people. So you're going to have to, for those of you in software, you don't have to interpret a whole lot. Those of you who aren't, you're going to have to do some interpret. Fine. I hope you understand this, because again, it's easy to say, but you have to really get a deep feel for the fact that the quality of something is built into it. It's not inspected. Inspection is one small aspect of quality. You finish something, you give it to the inspector looks at it. Sometimes they put a little tag in your pocket that says inspected by number 8, and then they ship it out. But if number 8, let's say it's a pair of pants and not even software, number 8 gets a pair of pants and they're defective, okay, they throw them out. They don't ship them. But right, that's not building quality in. If you build quality into the process, you still might have number 8 inspect them, but you're not going to have to throw away as many pants. Make sense? And a lot of what we call software quality is nothing but inspection. Inspection should be a very small percentage of quality. It should be part of the mix of quality. You don't rely on just one thing. When we talk about quality, you certainly you have some inspection, but you don't rely on that for everything. And the problem with inspection is this: if I rely so much on inspection, the people who are building the work and don't necessarily feel that they need to build quality in, because quality is not my concern. Somebody else is going to take care of the quality. I'm just going to write code. In the case of developers, you better damn well be sure that your inspection is really, really, really good. Because if they don't find it, guess who's going to find it? If there's a problem with it, who's going to find it? Your customer. And that's a real big problem. In my mind, and I think the people who invented BDD would agree with me that you can't talk about BDD without first talking about something called test-driven development. And this is something that's very interesting to me. This may be a new thought for some of you, and it may be old hat for some of you. I don't know. All I can say, and I'm embarrassed to say this, I was a software development director and manager before I really understood what TDD was. Right? So there's people who have been doing this for years who don't really understand it very well. TDD is not, I'm gonna write some code and build some tests. What TDD is it's called test-driven development. I write the tests first. Now that's an odd thing. When I first came across this idea, that seemed really odd to me, because I was steeped in this old school of I build something and then we do quality, or then I send it to somebody else who inspects it. Very odd thing for me to wrap my head around. Why would I even want to do something like this? It took me a while. I'm not always the sharpest knife in the drawer, but eventually I come around. What do? The TDD cycle is sometimes called red-green refactor, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to write a test. The test basically is, what do I want this software to achieve? And then I run the test, and I haven't written anything that makes the test pass. So guess what? The test is going to fail. So that's the red part. For some reason, we use red as a bad color. And then I'm going to write some code that allow the test to pass. And that's the green part. I write a little test, and I write a little code. Right? Write a little test, write a little code, but I'm always writing the test first. The tests, you can think of the test as the goal. I'm always writing the goal first, and then I'm writing the thing that achieves the goal. And then, for some reason, my text is off. It's throwing me off here. Then we refactor it. So we've created code. The test itself is a code. Then we've created a code for the test, which is actually the production code. That's the product that you ship to the customer. And then we refactor that. What does that mean for you folks who are not in software development or aren't that close to it? Refactor is, how many times do you, some of you, I'm sure you do, you've done a PowerPoint or a Word doc and you're going to send it to your boss, right? Do you send them the first version? I hope not, right? What are you going to do? You're going to look at it, you're going to rewrite it, you're going to make sentences clearer, you're going to reduce the amount of text, especially if it's upper management and C-level folks, because they love short, sweet bullet points. They don't want big explanations of things. You're going to edit it. That's what refactoring is, really. It's editing the code so that the code itself is better. And that's the TDD cycle. And it's really, really critical, because this is actually when we talk about the fact that you cannot inspect quality into a product, you can only build it in. This is how you build it in. Very simple, but revolutionary. That's the thing about really simple, good ideas, is revolutionary. Why do we do TDD? Well, TDD is basically going to help you with maintainability, flexibility, extensibility, other things of that nature. Because here's the thing about software products, and you all know that because you all are consumers of software products. They change all the time, don't they? They send you new enhancements, they fix defects, they do all kinds of things. They're changing the software all the time. That's the beauty of software, by the way. It's also a curse of the software, is it's relatively easy to change. Just like you can edit that Word document, right? If it's an electronic, you think about an electronic version of Word document, I can edit that anytime. It's not like a printed version, right? Back in the old days of software, and I've been long enough to be in the old days when we used to maybe press CDs. You remember CDs? With software on it, different kind of process, because once you press the CD, you can't change it, right? So, and that's where we had the long cycles. So I'm going to send out a new CD every year. But it doesn't work that way anymore. For the most part, everything's in the cloud, and they change it without you even knowing. Every time I come into Zoom, if I haven't been in for a while, there's something new that I probably don't like, because I'm getting old and I scream at clouds, right? So it needs to be flexible. It needs to be maintainable. It needs to be extensible. We need to be able to write the code so that the code itself can be changed easily. That's a big part of what we do. And a lot of times people write code, especially if they're not writing the test first, where it can't be changed. We get a high percentage of test code coverage. The percentage is not important. It's only directional. But what this allows us for is it allows us for having confidence when we deliver it. If I have a good percentage of my code covered by tests and those tests are passing, I've got a better chance that when I release this software to the world, I've got greater confidence that it's not going to be a problem. If I don't have a lot of tests, I'm probably going to spend a lot of time at the end of the process, which slows down value to the customer. I'm going to spend a lot of time checking and make sure everything's okay before I ship it out. That's a real problem, right? Because it's very, very slow. So it's about confidence. I'm going to streamline my code base, meaning I'm not going to have a whole bunch of stuff. I'm going to have cleaner interfaces. What does this mean for the people who come after me? It means it's easier for them. So I can refactor easily. I'm going to have to refactor easily because I'm going to have to refactor code all the time. The test provides some documentation. So when I have a new developer, I can say, hey, look at the test. The test will explain what the code is doing. It's not the best way to learn, but it's a good way. It's better than just saying, look at the code, because code is tough to read, even if you're good at it. Bottom line, higher quality. That's why you do it. So why doesn't everybody do it? Because they weren't taught that way. I got reasons for it, but anyway, anybody know who this gentleman is? Some of you probably do. I know some of you taken the class before. This is Robert Martin. He's called Uncle Bob, which sounds kind of creepy to me, but anyway, he's a software professional. He's been around since 1970. He was one of the co-writers of the Agile Manifesto. He wrote a book called Clean Code, a handbook of Agile software craftsmanship. Gosh, just the title gives me tingles. And I got some quotes from the book, because when I'm giving this presentation, I'm not just giving it to you all. A lot of times I'm giving it to developers, because I want to get developers on board with this concept. So I say, hey, look, don't listen to Larry Apke. Who the hell is Larry Apke? You don't have to listen to me. I want to introduce you to somebody who's been writing code since 1970, who basically wrote the book on software development, or wrote one of the main books on software development, and has been doing software development pretty much his entire life. Says it's a myth we can get the system right the first time. And he uses the word stories, which is interesting because that's a term we use in Agile sometimes. We should just do what we need to do today and worry about tomorrow later, right? That's what we're doing with our backlog. We're concentrating on today's stuff and not concentrating on everything like we do in waterfall. This is the essence of iterative and incremental development. Test-driven development, refactoring the clean code they do, make it work at a code level. You have a product that's code. That's your product. How do I make it work? Test-driven development. Why? Well, one of the things about test-driven development is that the tests themselves become, quote unquote, for those of you who are trying to map this to waterfall, the requirements. Well-written tests can be just like requirements, and that's what we're going to talk about today when we talk about BDD. So here's the thing about code, which is really important too. When we teach people how to do software development, for the most part, there's one university out there that I know is different because they teach test-driven, behavior-driven development from the get-go, and that's Brown University, only because I ran into somebody who went to school there, and they told me that. A lot of places don't teach it that way. Most of the places, and the way I learned was books, actually. You remember books, some of you? They were big, thick books. I mean, seriously, if it fell off the shelf and hit you on the head, you get a concussion, these big, thick books. That's how I learned how to program, right? But they teach you how to write code. And I think that's the wrong thing to do. Let me back up a second. I don't like to say right or wrong. It's not the optimal thing to do. Because here's the problem. It's not really about writing code, it's about reading code. Because when you become a developer in the real world, outside of academia, you're going to spend most of your time reading somebody else's code. So your job as a software developer is not to write code, but to write code that is easy to read. Because as Bob Martin says, the time that you spent reading code, sometimes your own, but mostly code that somebody else has written, is 10 to 1 or more. So your job as a software developer should be to write your code in a way that's easy to read. So what we should really teach people, if we want to be optimal in colleges, and I don't know if any colleges are listening to me, probably not, we should teach them how to read code. And we should teach them how to write tests that make the code more readable. A lot of developers, and I'm not, hopefully none of the folks here on the call, I know we got some developers, think that getting something working is what you do. That's not it. Because here's what happens. Whatever you write today in the real world is somebody else is going to have to read tomorrow. They're going to have to change it. And you have to write it so that they can read it, so that they can change it. Because if they can't read the code, you're going to run into all kinds of problems when they try to make changes. When I used to have software developers who reported to me, I'm the software development director and manager, I used to tell my developers, I said, write your code as if the next person who has to work with your code is a psychopath who has your home address. You're not writing code for you. I had so many developers I worked with who were writing code a lot of times to show how clever they were. That angered me. I don't care how clever you are. We're trying to build a product, a quality product. I need the next person who reads this code to be able to read it, not read the code and take hours to figure it out, and then finally say, oh, this person's really intelligent. This person is brilliant. No, I don't want that. Write the code so people can read it.
I'm going to add that do that for technical writers also, because otherwise they will want to kill you.
There you go.
Don't just take screenshots of your work and think that that's good documentation.
All right, there you go. See another perspective. Now, when I'm talking to programmers, I say, software developers, I say to them, look, I'm not saying this. I might happen to agree with Bob Martin on this because he's smarter about this than me. And I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer, but I tend to agree with people who are smarter than me when they know more than me. Programmers who satisfy themselves with merely working code or behaving unprofessionally. If that's your goal in writing code, that's not professional. That's not what professional software developers do. Writing clean code is what you must do, he says, in order to be call yourself a professional. And it's more than just that. It's not just the tests and readable code that go into being a software development professional. And this is a tough job, by the way. I love my software developers. I do, especially the really, really good ones, because these are some of the most intelligent folks on the planet, really, honestly. Because you have so much that you need to do in your code. Your code must be secure. If I write a bunch of code and it just works on, here's the one before I get into security. Here's the one that kills me, is when the developer says, well, it worked on my machine. It worked on my machine. You know what I tell them? I said, good, we're going to invite the 10 million customers we have to your house so that they can work on your machine. How about that? Sound good? No, your code must be secure. Even if you write, quote unquote, what you think is good code, but you're opening up security loopholes and other things, that's not writing quality code. Because how many times have we had security issues? How many times do you as an individual get an email saying, right? What was it? Equifax, I think was the one, was a big one. Experian, whatever, whoever it was. Anyway, and I get an email says, hey, your data's been breached. I said, well, that's good, because everybody can have my data anyway. I mean, I think if they really want it, you can have it. But yeah, it's a problem. It's a huge problem. Your code must be performant, right? Can't just work on your system. If I click on a button and it takes 10 seconds for something to happen, that is not a good experience for me, right? We all have the attention span of a gnat, and the younger you are, the more gnat-like your attention span is. Sorry, folks, it's probably the way it is. When I click on a button, I should have some response. I'm going to be old man here, but HBO, right? I got HBO Max. I don't know what they call themselves now. And I press a button and nothing happens. I don't know if something's going on or not. I mean, that's not quality in my book. I want to press a button. I want something to happen. I don't care. Put a dancing GIF in there or something, or GIF, depending on which side of the fence you are. Your code must be deployable. If you can't deploy it, great, works on your machine, kind of thing. Who cares? Must integrate and play well with others. Right? You wrote a bunch of code, but you can't integrate it with others. What good is it? In other words, there's a whole bunch of things that go into being a programmer. Quality cannot, and quality includes all these things and more, be injected into the code. It must be injected into code. It cannot be put in after the fact. You cannot just rely on inspection of all this stuff. It doesn't mean that you don't have inspection, but if you rely only on inspection, that's where you're going to get in trouble. And that's where I think a lot of folks do get in trouble. So why doesn't everybody do this? Most developers haven't learned how to do test-driven development, and there's a learning curve. There's another problem I see in all organizations I go in. How much do we invest in learning? Not a lot. In fact, I want to get a little bit delve into this a little bit more, because I think it's really important. We talk about training. I could give, about training. Fill in the blank. I'm sorry, I'm just trying not to be crude here early in the morning. I don't care about training. I care about learning. Training is what I do to you. Learning is what happens to you. That's why I want you to turn on your cameras, because you say, Larry, you're doing training. No, I'm not trying to do training. I'm trying to do learning. I'm trying to see if I'm getting through to you all. I want to see in your eyes as I'm talking that you actually understand what I'm saying. That's learning. Just because I'm doing it in a lecture format, somebody says, well, you're doing it wrong. I don't think I'm doing it wrong. I want you all to learn. I already know this. There's no value in me talking unless you actually get something out of it. Sorry, I just go off on a tangent here, because we don't do that. If I were building an organization from scratch, one of the very first questions I would ask is, how much do we as an organization invest in learning? Interesting question. I have an answer. I think it's at least just to tread water 10% of our time. I think it's more like 20% of our time, meaning that you spending a full day in a week learning something new, learning something that makes you better at your job. We're also keen on implementing, but you know, who was it? I think it was Lincoln. Of course, Lincoln and Einstein and a few other people said everything that ever existed. So I don't know if this is really a quote, but he said, look, if I got to chop down a tree, I'm going to spend, you know, I got 8 hours to chop down a tree. I'm going to spend the first, whatever, 5 hours sharpening the axe or whatever, 8 hour. I don't know. You know, you've heard it before. Why? Because it's important, right? We're all running around with the equivalent of dull axes in our head all the time because we don't have organizations that invest in learning. We invest in training. Don't like it. Anyway, developers haven't learned to do it. They don't take the time to do it. The companies don't invest in the time for them to do it. We could come up with all excuses why they don't do it, but they just don't do it. There's a learning curve. It's extremely disciplined. And I love my developers. I do. But these aren't always the most disciplined people in the world. They like to play around with things. That's how they got into the business. I'm surprised my brother isn't a software developer, to be honest with you. He's actually a chemist. So it's kind of like that, right? Because he was the one in Christmas who got a toy. And within 2 days, that toy was completely taken apart to see how it works, right? That's kind of how engineers are. And that's great. They want to know how things work. But that kind of thing, and I don't want to make, you know, stereotypes are terrible anyway, but some of you know what I'm talking about. Discipline is hard. I think it's just harder in some cases for software development. It's hard for everyone. And it's extremely disciplined. What do you mean I can't write a single line of code without first writing a line of test kind of thing, right? It's mind-numbingly disciplined. I'm a proponent of it. And so just to get the feel for it, I've done some of this, and I don't consider myself a good developer. I always tell people, if I can do these things, imagine what you can do, right? Because you're actually a software development person. I'm not. But I've done some of these things. That doesn't make me a software developer. It just makes me somebody who played around with software development. And I've done test-driven development, and it's mind-numbingly slow. There's a wonderful book. It's called, I think it's called Obey the Testing Goat or something like that. It's about doing test-driven development in Python. I cracked that thing open a couple of years ago because I always, every once in a while, have to inflict the pain of doing some coding so that I can have empathy with the folks who are actually doing the work. It's mind-numbingly disciplined. Enough said. There's a perception among a lot of people that development is slower. But that's not true. That's why I say it's a perception. It is, in the end, much, much faster. But if we look at the short term only, there are times when it might appear to be slower. But I'll get into that a little bit later. It's difficult to introduce with legacy code. Look, here's the only time that you're going to get to do what we call greenfield code is when you're learning how to code. Any other experience, once you become a developer in the world, as opposed to in academia, you're going to have to work with somebody else's code. And chances are that that code's been around for 10 years. Especially if you're a new developer, because that's where they're going to put you, because nobody wants to work on it. Right? Because it's been around so long. So it's difficult to do with code that exists that doesn't have this done to it. If the code has not been written this way to begin with, and I start working with it, 10 years down the road, boy, it's going to be a problem. There's some things we can do. You have to learn other skills. If you're doing object-oriented programming, you have to learn how to mock objects, and you have to learn this whole skill of mocking things. And for those of you who aren't software developers, your eyes are going to kind of roll in the back of your head. That's fine. Don't pay attention too much to all the details on the slides. Pay attention to the thinking behind it. I have other skills I need to learn. It's not just learning test-driven development. So Dan Norris says, and he's the one who basically invented TDD or BDD with some other people, said, I keep coming across this problem. The programmers want to do this, right? Good programmers. There's a bunch of programmers who don't care. If you don't care about your job, nothing I can do about it. You care about what you do. You want to take pride in your work. There's a lot of programmers who want to do it, but I keep coming across the same problems. They don't know what to do. They don't know what to call it. They don't know what they just don't do it. How can I get them to do it? Or how can I help them to do it? Because it's something they want to do. I think it's better worded that way. So along came BDD, behavior-driven development. Dan North said, look, here's one of the ways that we can start talking about the work so that we can write these tests. Let's talk about the behavior of the system. And lo and behold, when we started doing that, what happened was this. We found out that we got a lot more out of it than we expected. It's not just a way to do test-driven development. In fact, that's not even the most important reason now that we've started doing this behavior-driven development. It's because of this very simple fact, that the conversation between the people who have a need for the software, which I'm going to refer to in this case as the business, it could be the customer, and the people who are actually implementing and writing the software, those conversations get much, much better. When I was down in Texas, I did a gig, and I'll refer to this even in this presentation a few times because that was one of my first coaching gigs. This was a long time ago. The business people used to refer to what the developers said. They called it dolphin speak. You probably heard how dolphins, speak. They go wow, 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 whatever. They knew it was to me, it's like Charlie Brown's teacher, but they knew it was language, but they couldn't really understand each other. Now, I'm going to ask you a very simple question. If the business people and developers don't understand each other, what are the odds you're going to build good software? Not very good. And so what we found out what Dan North and others found out when they started doing behavior-driven development is they found out that the conversations and the understanding between business and development, the people implementing the work and the people who understood the work were much, much better. And when your conversations are much, much better, the odds of you actually building what somebody wants are much, much greater. This is the huge thing about behavior-driven development. And that's why we talk about this in terms of story refinement or backlog item refinement, because we're going into detail. And the key to refinement is that we have a shared understanding of what needs to be done. So BDD leads to that shared understanding. So the way I say it is, if you want to look at going back to Drucker's comments, if we need to build the right things right, TDD builds it right. It's more tactical. It builds it right. BDD helps us to build the right thing. So if we take BDD and TDD and put them together, we're going to build the right things right. That's the hope. There's no silver bullet in software development. I've been giving this talk for I don't know how long. It's been well over a decade. And still, this is the closest thing to a silver bullet in software development. There isn't one, but this is as close as you're going to get. I wrote a blog post a long time ago, 10 reasons why BDD changes everything. I'm going to go through it rather quickly so I can catch up on timing. Main reason we do this, communication between business and development is extremely focused because we have a common language, so we can come to a common understanding so that we can build what the folks who want us to build something actually want built. The business needs will tie directly to the code that is written, and I'll show you how that happens. Developers know what they need to do. This is the thing that Dan North wanted this to achieve, and it does achieve this. So that the test case, so you can write at least the minimum TDD stuff. And then when you actually do TDD, as opposed to just talking about TDD, you'll start to see the benefits of TDD. The code is easier to maintain. It's self-documenting. Stories are easier to refine, break down. Teams can be more agile. And in this sense, I want to go back to the kind of the golden rule of agile. They can deliver more value quicker. Developers can be trained and onboarded easier. This is one of the big things that I found too, which is really huge, and most people don't think about it enough. In the chat, put in what you think the average tenure of a software developer in San Francisco Bay Area is. How long do software developers last on their job before they go to another job? Anybody know? The number keeps going down, I think. I don't know where it is today. I know where it was about 5-10 years ago, and that's 2 years. Meaning on the average, your developer is going to leave you in 2 years, probably maybe sooner. And these are the tough people to get, by the way. You all know that if you worked in software development, these are the tough people to get. And there's many reasons why a developer is worth their weight in gold if they're really good and they do the things that I talk about. They might not be around long, so you're going to have turnover. Hopefully you'll have less. If you do some of the things I'm talking about, you actually have less turnover, but hopefully you'll have less turnover. But if you do, you're always going to have to onboard people. Now, I worked at one company, I won't mention the name, but they bragged that their code was so complex. This is as the young folks say, this is a weird flex. They bragged that their code was so complex it took somebody 6 months before they would become astute enough to actually be able to write something. Now think about it. On the average, that's 25% of their time is doing nothing but coming up to speed. When you have BDD, which is a human readable English, and it matches your test cases, which is code, and it matches your production code for quality, you have a direct relationship with it. So if I read the documents, the BDD human readable English, if you're using English, I suppose in other languages, but readable document, it tells me exactly what the code does. How long does it take me to come up to speed? Not 25% of my tenure. There's more visibility into the team progress and status. We can see as tests are written and tests pass. How does BDD fit in? Well, BDD actually, you have the TDD cycle kind of in the center, and BDD feeds into the TDD. So it kind of sits above it, if you want to look at it that way. I was always told, you don't sell the steak, you sell the sizzle. Sell the benefits first. So I'm going to do that because it's relatively easy. So I'm going to go into some real world stories. I spent 25 years of my life, give or take, in Scottsdale, Arizona. I don't know if we have any Arizonis here on the call. Wonderful place. I worked for a financial services company in Scottsdale, Arizona. And one of the things that happened, I didn't tell you the story of BDD, so I'm going to have to backtrack on that. I was a software development manager at one place, and I had this wonderful developer. His name happened to be Jim. And we were in a retrospective one day, and this is the beauty of the retrospective. Jim was a type of programmer, and I give a lot of my relative success in my career to some of his feedback that he provided to me, even though it was harsh at times. I remember one time he sat me down and said, "Larry, I'll tell you this again when we talk about people," where he says, you're a good person, but you're not really a good software development manager. You really don't know what you're doing." That's pretty harsh to hear. But the one day we were in a retrospective and Jim says, we should do BDD. I said, sure, let's do it. That's the beauty of the retrospective. Let's try it. Developers loved it. We had a good time. We wrote better software, et cetera, et cetera. I didn't understand what it was. I didn't take the time. I said, I'm a hands-off kind of guy. You think it's going to work? Do it. Why would I stand in your way? But when I went to another job, they had a problem with writing, what they refer to as requirements, but we would refer to as stories or acceptance criteria usually. And so I sat down, I said, hey, we tried this thing, my previous job called behavior-driven development. Let's try it here. They said, that's great, let's do it. How do we do it? And I said, well, I don't know. I thought you knew. So I had to learn it. So it wasn't, we had already done it, and I already seen that it was good, but I didn't understand it. So I had to actually do the research and understand what it was. And so we implemented it at this financial services company, and they were having such a hard time, getting the requirements out or the stories out or the acceptance criteria for the work. And once we did it, it was amazing. Back then, we still had the person who was writing the stories was called an analyst, which we don't see as much these days. But it got to a point where I had to tell her, I said, slow down, you're going too far ahead. It was as if the example was, you ever been on a cloudy day and all of a sudden the sun comes out? That's what it was like. It was like one of those Moses parts the river kind of things, or whatever. It was just night and day. So that's great. So gosh, I became a fan of BDD because now I understood it, and now we've tried it a couple of different places, worked pretty well, and I've spent more time understanding it. So I go down and I do my first kind of real coaching gig. down in San Antonio. For those of you who don't know, that's the Alamo. Remember that. That's my joke. It's terrible, but I keep trying. Another financial services company got the wonderful opportunity to work with an innovation lab, and in the innovation lab, our job was to take something that they had done a proof of concept and then get it into our customers' hands in 90 days or less. And at this company, they never got anything into the customers' hands in probably 6 months to a year or less. This is breakthrough work, and we were as agile as could be. It's one of the most agile teams I've ever worked with, and we introduced behavior-driven and test-driven development, and it saved our butts numbers of times. And not only were we able to deliver in 90 days, I think we delivered in like 50 days or something crazy like that. They'd never seen it before. Wonderful products, by the way. I'll probably talk about it again at other points in time, but wonderful working with these people. And so a couple of the people, it was so good that they started going around the building and teaching other people. Can you imagine how proud I was as an agile coach? You kind of feel like a parent when you're an agile coach. I don't mean that in a negative way. You just kind of take that pride of when your team does something. And they went around and they're talking to people and they're teaching them BDD and TDD. And then one of the people asked them a question, do you always do it? And the answer was no. There's times when we thought we could go faster by not doing it. And every time we thought we could go faster by not doing it, it ended up taking us more time. So the answer is yes, we do it all the time now. It is that big a deal. But when I get to it, you're going to say, wait a minute, this is not that big a deal. That's why I had to make a big deal out of it first, because for a lot of you, you can say, that makes sense. Why is he making such a big deal out of it? Well, it does. It changes things. You can adopt it. Here's the fun thing. I know some of you are working now. Some of you will be working soon, hopefully sooner rather than later, and you're going to be in companies. You can do this very easily. Step one. This is the most important bit. When we usually call the things in a backlog stories, you don't have to call them stories, you call them product backlog items. When you are refining the work, when you're gaining that understanding of the work, that shared understanding, simply talk about the work in different ways. Use this BDD style, which I'm going to show you in a second, to talk about the work differently. That's not that tough to do. That's something that if you're working today, you could go into, I'm assuming it's early where you are because it's early where I am, but you go in today to your job and you can introduce it today. Because all you have to do is when you're sitting down with the developers, I'm assuming you're doing Scrum, you have Scrum teams, you're sitting down with the developers, you're refining the work, just talk about it differently. Use this style. You don't have to get permission to do it because really what you're doing is you're just changing the way you talk about acceptance criteria, and I'll show you what it looks like. Step two is once you start talking about it differently, you can start to leverage these things, and it's scenario-based. You can start leveraging these things to actually create the automated test. You can start doing the test-driven development. And that's really powerful. But you have to understand, I don't have to do the test-driven development to talk about the work differently. I don't have to have automated tests even. These scenarios that we're going to write are basically tests. They're called acceptance tests. We're going to write these acceptance tests. I can run them manually. I wouldn't want to, but I could without any tools or anything else, right? You don't need any other tool. Existing tools you have for step one. Step two, you need some tools. The problem with tools is sometimes you got to go kiss the Pope's ring or something like that to get new tools introduced. But you probably have these tools already introduced because you're probably using something like JUnit or something like that. So just write your JUnit test differently. Step three, more tools-based. There are BDD tools that will help take the human readable language that we're going to talk about in scenarios in step one and map it to the tests. And there's power in that. I'll show you a little bit about that in just a second. The step one is accomplished by what we call the three amigos, the product owners, developers, and we usually have people who are called quality assurance people. They're generally on the team. Remember I said the team was cross-functional? Usually on the team when you have a cross-functional team, you have somebody who's in charge of helping with quality. And it's not that you have to, because again, quality is built in. But here's the thing about quality people, by the way. What you need is you need the quality mindset. I'm big on mindset. mental models and lenses. People who spend their time working with quality, especially in software development, they see the world differently. They have different mental models. Here's the easiest way to explain it to people who are not involved with it. Developers build it, testers try to break it. It is a different mindset to figure out how to break things than it is how to build things. So you're going to need people with that mindset. And this step one, as I said, is during the story refinement, and you have that in your cadence so that it happens. And it's with the stuff at the top. This is what brought the biggest bang for the buck, this step one. If it was some kind of pie chart or something like that, this is probably over 50% of the value is just talking about the work differently. I know that sounds strange, by the way, because I see this other thing that we do as human beings is we want to go to tools right away, as if tools will save us. In a complex world, tools will not save you. They will help you, but they will not save you. You know what will help you? Feedback. You know what feedback is? People talking. People talking differently is the key, and that's why people miss it. Because they want to go right to the concrete, and this is a little squishy. Here's how we talk about things. We usually talk about stories. I'm going to talk about an ATM. Why? Because it's on Dan North's website. Why redo it? When you go look at BDD and Dan North, great. I've got the link there. You're going to see the same example. I give Dan and his group all the credit so that I don't get sued, but why mess with a good thing? I remember when ATMs came into existence, by the way. That's how old I am. The first ATMs when I was a kid, they called them genie machines. It was Fifth Third Bank back in Cincinnati, Ohio, where I grew up. Why did they call them genie? Because they had this cute little character, because they wanted to be friendly, because this is something new. You're interacting with a machine and not a person. You're not going in to say hi to Jim at the bank. One of the things that I can do with an ATM is I can withdraw cash. So I'm going to create something called a scenario, but first I'm going to create the story. Now, you don't have to do this, but in Agile and Scrum, we have this thing where we usually write stories, and we write them as kind of stories, pseudo stories. That word story, by the way, comes to us from Kent Beck. If you don't know Kent Beck's name, he was the one who invented extreme programming. We'll talk a little bit about it, but not too much. Why do they call them stories? Because these are the stories our customers will tell other customers. Isn't that great? I love how he said it that way. These are the stories our customers will tell other stories. So we started calling them stories. That notion of stories always exists. We have this thing, I refer to it as a story narrative. Other people call it other things, but here's the narrative of the story. It's usually as a, I want, so that. So as a customer, not a great phrase, but as a customer, I want to withdraw cash from an ATM. Why? So I don't have to wait in line in the bank. Jim, did you cover this in the Scrum or no?
We didn't do the this scenario. I did a donut shop one, but
Good enough. So you're familiar with the concept. I don't want to go too deep into it because I'm looking at my time and I want to catch up on my time. So that's the story. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to create what's called scenarios. This is our acceptance criteria. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a test. It's called an acceptance test. How do I know if I've done this thing right? So what's the first scenario? People have money in their account, right? This is what sometimes I refer to, others refer to as a happy path, right? Customer has money in their account. I'm going to use a few keywords here, and I'm going to point them out to you. The first keyword is given. Given is my prerequisite. Think about it this way. A system, we're going to talk about this in terms of system, is in a certain state. There are certain things about that state that are important. What's important about this? Well, first I said the account has money in it. So the first given is given the account has money. And that's the first part of this language of BDD that's sometimes referred to as gherkin, by the way, but this language of BDD is what are my givens? So I start with given. Well, is this the only thing that's important? No, there's other things. So my next key word is a simple word. It's and. It's a conjunction. You know that one because conjunction, junction, what's your function? If you don't know that, look it up. It's Schoolhouse Rock. Great stuff. It's how I learned English. What other preconditions do I have that are important? Oh, the card must be valid. All right. What else? The ATM actually contains cash. I didn't know this was a problem. But yeah, I guess it is. Right? If I put my card in and request cash and you don't have any, that might be a problem. Okay, so these are my prerequisites. I may have more, I may have less. Where do these come from, by the way? Remember I told you got to have the QA mindset? This is the QA mindset. Because the QA people are going to look for different scenarios that might try to break things. This is not an edge scenario. This is the happy path. So this is not where we're looking to break things, but we'll look at other reasons why, quote unquote, break things, for lack of a better word. What's my next keyword? Something's going to happen to the system. The system is in a state. Something happens to the system. Somebody pushes a button, something does something, whatever. That's the win. And the only thing I want to say about the win clause is I don't want ands in this win clause. Right? Because you want to think about it like an experiment. I only want to change one variable. Here's a variable I'm going to change, customer requests cash. I don't want to do customer request cash and then tries to pay off their boat. Those are two different scenarios. So anytime I'm working with a team and it says when the customer does this and the customer does this, you have two different scenarios, split it into two. Make sense? Something happens to the system. My next keyword, then. Now those are your four keywords, given, when, then, and then we use and. Then. How does the system react? Because this is about behavior and this is about systems. Well, first thing we need to do, take the money out of the account. And it'd be great if I could go to an ATM and this didn't happen, right? It'd be like a slot machine that was broken. And give them their cash. And give them their card back when they're done, right? You all know ATMs, this makes sense, right? This passes this and the story narrative that we had on the page before, the slide before this passes what I referred to, you hear me use this probably quite a bit, the Gail Apke test. What's the Gail Apke test? Gail Apke is my mother. She's in her 80s. If I gave her this scenario, she would understand it. Right? That passes the Gail Apke test. The other thing I'm going to ask is I've got my developers. We're doing this in the room together or virtually in the room together, right? With my developers and my team. I'm going to ask my developers, could you write a failing test for this? Right? Could anybody understand it? Gail Apke test, meaning that anyone, including our business people, could understand it. And could you write a failing test for it? If the answer is no, we need to refine that scenario. We need to add more detail. We need to remove some detail. We need to be getting more detail on things. We need to be more precise on certain things, right? But this opens up the conversation. And this is the big difference, because now we're speaking the same language. It's no longer dolphin speak. This is amazing stuff if you've ever seen it done. And I have, and I've done it. And it makes all the difference in the world. I can't emphasize that enough. But there's more than one scenario, right? If there's only the happy path scenario, that's not good. We've got other things. QA says, well, what about, you said that the customer has money. What if the customer doesn't have money? These things, by the way, they kind of write themselves. Once you write the happy path, it writes itself, because in the first one, you said, what if they have money? And you said, what if the card is valid? And you said, what if the ATM has money in it? Right? And boom, I'm not that smart a guy, but I can think of 3 scenarios already that I can build off just the first happy path scenario. And I used to do that, by the way, when I worked for a little company called Splunk. I didn't know what Splunk software did. I mean, I know generally what it does, but I used to sit in meetings with them and we would refine the work. And I'd say, here, let's have fun. You give me the first scenario and I'll give you the next 3. And it was like, to them, it was like magic. They're like, what, how did you know this? I said, it's very simple. If you're going to tell me that one of my things is the account has money, I'm going to tell you the other thing is my account doesn't have money. And that's the second scenario. Given the account is overdrawn, what else about it? Card is valid. Don't need anything else. Nothing else important, right? When the customer requests cash, then what do? Well, remember how I said the given belong to the kind of the QA mindset that we're going to come up with all these different crazy scenarios. Some of them we'll keep, some of them we might throw out, et cetera, et cetera. The then belongs to the business, because what I'm really saying to them is, here's something that could happen in the real world. What do you as a business want to happen as a result? That's my then. So the given kind of belongs to QA, the then kind of belongs to the business. Okay, we'll give them a rejection message because we don't want to give them money. Don't give them the money. Give them their card back. right? These are business decisions. What do you do? Here's a scenario. What do you do, business? Okay, well, this is what we do, and this is how we talk together. Now, again, KO-APKey test. Anyone can understand it. And I talked to my developers. They said, yeah, I can write a failing test for it. Great. We just refined that. We've got 2 scenarios now, and we can keep going. We could have another scenario where the card is not valid. What do you do? Right? So I could write, given the card is not valid, I don't need anything else because that's the main thing. When the customer requests cash, and then I say, business, what do you want to do? Well, then I can imagine a world where the business says, then you lock the door behind them and you auto dial the police, right? Can you imagine that as a potential scenario? Or then you say, if the card is overdrawn, instead of giving them the card back, you say, hey, hold the card and have them come inside to get the card. I wouldn't do that, but you could, because then I can counsel you on how to do better on your account. Again, business makes a decision. Here's a scenario. What do you want to do? How do you want to react? Very simple stuff. And all systems are like this, by the way. I used to draw it. I don't have it on the slide, but I want you to imagine a box. Imagine I'm drawing a box virtually here. Every box, this is every system in Larry's mind. I'm a very simple person, you know that. Every box has input and output. And then in the box itself, we call it throughput. That's the work that we do on it. When you look at this, input, given. Throughput when, output then. You're building a system. And software architecture, and most architectures are basically, how do I align those boxes where one system's output is another system's input, et cetera, and how do I string those together? That's to me is system architecture. I know I'm a little simplistic, but that to me is system architecture. So step 2, how can we leverage these tests? Well, the interesting thing is when I was down in San Antonio, I learn things as a coach, and I think that's a great thing about being a coach is you try things and you learn things just like anyone else. I said, man, we need to get this BDD tool. It's going to really help us, because it does. And then we went through the gyrations of trying to get it approved. And guess what? That took a while. So we didn't have the tool for a while, and I said, oh man, how do we do this? And I should have thought about it. It was one of those duh moments. We can take it and put it right into the test, right? So they were using, I mean, if you're using Java, it's called unit test framework, which is a misnomer. It's just an automated testing framework. They put them right into the tests themselves. So I'm going to show you a little code. For those of you not code people, it's okay. Just pay attention to the overall feeling for it. This is a pseudo Java code test. And for those of you who don't know code, I'm going to teach you a little code this morning. It's not that hard. Basically, what I'm saying is I'm going to create a test called account is in credit test, which is my very first scenario. And you'll notice what I've done here very simply is I copied and pasted. I'm very big on copying and pasting. I'm not big on programming. I'm good on copying and pasting. It's a good thing ChatGPT wasn't around when I was trying to program, because I just used that. This slash, those are comments. I could take the scenario and I can put it in the comments of the test. That's what they taught me. That's the thing I went dumb. I should have known that. I should have figured that out myself. Felt really bad. But that's what they did. They just took the scenarios and they put it in the comments of the test, because the comments don't run when the code is compiled. They're stripped out. It doesn't slow things down. And that's what they did. And you can see what we've done here. Sometimes it's called not only test-driven design, but test-driven, or not test-driven development, but test-driven design, is we're actually designing the system. We're talking about what methods do I create? What do I pass to those methods? Because I'm going to create a method, for those of you who don't know what that is a thing that I can do in code called customer request cache. Where do I get that? Well, I got that from the thing that says when the customer requests cache. So you can see how this is actually helping me to build better code, because it's telling me what do I need in my code, as opposed to just writing the code and then saying what do I need in my test. It's completely opposite and counterintuitive as well. And then you see at the end, you can see that there's certain things called assertions. And in testing, assertions are really easy. You assert something, and then that assertion is either true or false. You've done this in your own life, so it's no big deal. What we're saying is, if you look at the first one, we want to assert that the expected balance is equivalent to the final account balance. And if the assertion is false, then this test fails. And that's the red. We also want to, as you can see, we want to make sure that the cash is dispensed. So we check some kind of value that says cash dispensed. And if the value of that is true, then this test passes. It's helping us to write the production code, not just test-driven development, but test-driven design as well. Step 3 is introducing those BDD tools. You can see I have Cucumber over here because one of the tools is Cucumber. I was talking with I lost who I was talking with about RSpec, which is similar to this. BDD tools basically will take that human readable English and will map it to the code of the test so that you have this kind of bridge between them. And they have a whole bunch of different ones for different languages. The one for Ruby is RSpec, but they also have Cucumber for Ruby. They're different tools. It doesn't matter. I'm not as concerned about the tools. Again, it's the conversations and making sure that we have the testing, and that the testing is helping us to create our product. So for those of you who are not in software development, just think about it. How do I create tests that help me create my product? So you create a better product, because if you can create the right tests, you're going to create the right product if all the tests pass. There's a whole bunch of stuff on what the BDD tools will do. I'm going to skip over it, folks, because we don't need to do it. Just it's there. Sometimes I go into some detail about it, but given the time, it's not, the juice is not worth the squeeze, as folks used to say. There's a bunch of other tools that we can use to amalgamate these tests. The bottom line is this. At the end, I have human readable English explanations of my code, and I can run those human readable English explanations of my code, and I can see where things go wrong. Here's an example. This is about pagination. The scenario is, given the products per page is set to 20, and there's a category with 30 products. When I view the category, I should see 20 products. Okay. And when I click on page 2, I should see 5 products. That's what it's saying. Very simple thing, right? You get it. Every time I click on the next page, it's going to show me 5 more products. It's going to show me 20 on the first page, every subsequent page, 5 products. But what you can see here is that this test has not passed, because it says right here, I expected to see 5 on page 2. When I click next, what did I see? I saw 10. So it doesn't take much training. I probably did it in like a couple minutes to see how I can use this to understand in human readable English what I have or haven't done, in this case, haven't done correctly. When I click on the next button, I should see 5 products. I see 10. Great, easy to fix. This is the beauty of BDD, by the way. And when we used it for that product that we were able to deliver in 45 days or whatever it was, instead of 90 days, here's one of the scenarios that happened. And I've got like 2 minutes to explain it. We had a third-party system that we had to work with, a financial system. This is not unusual in software development. You might have run into it before. And a lot of times what happens is you will send them certain information. They will do something and they'll send it back to you. Again, simple input, throughput, output. And usually we call those things that we're sending to other products APIs, for those of you who know these things. And if, for some of you, this is as technical as we get, so just stick with us on it. You can take a small mental nap for a second. What we did is we built tests for those APIs, meaning we're going to send you 5. We're going to send you, 5 and 2, and you're going to send us back 7. And we wrote a test for it, so that when we integrated the software with their software, we could run all these tests to see if they adhered to the contract, the API that we gave them. And when we did that, what happened is a lot of the contract stuff failed. A lot of the tests failed. But the beauty of it was, anytime you've worked with a third-party vendor and there's a problem, if you don't have these tests, because these tests will tell you exactly where it failed, right? If you don't have these tests, what you're going to do is say, it's your problem. What is your vendor going to say? No, it's your problem. right? And I've seen these contests go on for a long time. There's a word for these kind of contests. I've seen them go on for a long time. The longer they go on, again, less value I'm getting out, and it's because it's taking me longer. When we integrated these tests with this third-party vendor, we knew exactly where the problem was wrong. We got on the phone 5 minutes later, 5 minutes after we integrated the code, we ran all the tests, we saw where it failed. We got on the phone, we said, "You screwed up." Their first answer, "No, we didn't screw up. You screwed up." No, you screwed up. We know exactly where you screwed up. We can see which line of code in our test that you did not pass. Oh, we get it now. We can show them something like this. Oh, we get it. I was supposed to write the code so that you saw 5 products, you're seeing 10 products. Okay, well, let's go fix it. They fixed it almost immediately, sent it back to us, reintegrated, retested, everything was fine. One of the reasons we were able to deliver in 45 days and not 90 or 6 months. I know I had to go through that fast because I was slow at the beginning, but I think you guys get what I'm saying. This stuff is a game changer if you're in software development, but it's also a game changer in anything you do. Think about your goal, write a test, and then see if what you created allows those tests to pass. That's a win. That's building quality in. There's so much more I could say about it, but I'm out of time. Hope you all got some of this. We're going to talk next time about what happens when we don't build quality in and some of the problems with that. We call it technical debt and other things. We'll talk about that, and then we'll start getting into some of the Reinerts and stuff, which is really, really interesting. Spent a couple classes on that. Thank you all. I've got to go. I got a meeting I'm late for. You all have a wonderful day, and I look forward to seeing you all real soon.
Thanks so much, Larry. Really glad to be able to have you. We can take a few questions here. I'm going to go ahead and bring the recording to a close first off. And then for anyone that is interested, we do have, for anyone that's looking to be able to give back to the job hackers themselves, and they have the time and the ability, particularly if you're in between roles or any other, we do have a volunteers channel, the hashtag volunteers, which you can be able to join. And we have a regular volunteers call every Wednesday at 8 a.m. Pacific. So we would love to be able to hear for any thoughts or anything else. All of the extensions and programs and other things that have come about have all come from volunteer resources and people wanting to give back. So I want to be able to make that clear as well. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording here, and then be happy to take any further questions regarding the class, or maybe we can be able to do some clarity on any of the content. Thanks all.